So Vicky, you have 23 years experience in teaching,
I
and
do.
you do, and 10 years you've been in the senior leadership team, and you've
That's
been
right.
the head teacher also for 4 years. But you've left
Yep.
teaching behind you now, haven't you? And you're still in education, but you have your own education coaching company, and you also
Yep.
have your own podcast called We Lead Well. Is that all correct?
That's right. Yep.
Fantastic,
Yep.
great. That's some background. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions today that were sent to me by members of various educational Facebook groups. And
Yep.
I've got some of my own questions also that I'd like to ask, if that's okay too.
That's absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Well, I'll just go ahead with our first question in that case.
Okay.
So, how did you get started in education, and were you in primary or a secondary setting?
So I'd always loved working with young people. I'd been a Brownie. I was a young leader at Brownies, and then I did a lot of theatre in education when I was at university, and I just really enjoyed working with young people. So I decided that teaching was going to be the thing for me, and I started to teach. I left university and went straight into a PGCE. So I've been in education for the whole of my life. It's a very strange thing to not be going back into some sort of educational setting in September. So I started training in 1997, and then I started teaching at a brilliant school called Ashton-on-Mersey School in Sale in 1998, and I was there for 4 years. I had a year out to go travelling around Australia, but other than that, I've been purely based in education, and I love education. I love working within the education sector. I just got exhausted, I think is probably the best way to describe it.
I'm sure a lot of teachers can relate to that, especially management. So what were the most rewarding aspects in your teaching career?
I think probably the most rewarding was when I was a head of English. I worked at Woodhay High School in Ramsbottom, and we improved the results there from 67% A star to C to 90% A star to C.
Oh, wow.
And that, I think, is probably the most rewarding thing I've done, but the most hard work thing. That it was such hard work to do it, but I had a brilliant department. We really focused on, I think this is where I learned most about what makes a difference really when you're leading in education. And we focused on teaching and learning. We focused on what was going on in the classroom, and we focused on how well our pupils were doing, and we taught to the children who were in front of us. So one of the things that we did there was we looked at writing, because data is useful because it gives you information, but it's not the be all and end all. It's what you do with the data that's important. So we looked at the writing data, and we realised that our children were not performing as well as they should be in their writing. So we took a really big sample of the children's work, and we looked specifically at where our children weren't succeeding in writing. And then we figured out, right, what can we do in the classroom that will help the children to be better writers? And I think that was one of the ways that we really started to improve results. We used the data that we were being given, and then we looked at how that was telling us things about the children that were in front of us, and then we figured out what we needed to do with the children in order to help them to improve. And we did that on a yearly basis. Every year we looked at the different cohorts, because you can't judge, I don't think anyway, you can't judge this year's cohort on how last year did. Last year's data will give you some information about how well you did with that group, but you have to look at the children who are sitting in front of you, and you have to really get to know what the children's strengths and weaknesses are, and what you can do in terms of teaching and learning. And the teaching and learning is the key bit that you need to improve. And as a department, we always talked about what we were doing. I think we were really collegiate in that department, and everybody shared their ideas and talked about things that worked and things that didn't work. And we were really enthusiastic and passionate about teaching. And I think that's what helped us to be such a great department and to make such improvements. And in terms of leading a team there, I really feel like we all gelled together. We all supported each other. We all worked hard. for each other, and we were always there for each other, and if anybody was struggling, we'd all do what we could to help out. And for me, that really clarified what leadership is. It's about being able to create that environment in which your staff feel supported, that they can take risks, that they can do things and try things out, and work for the best outcomes for the children. So probably that for me is the most rewarding part of my career. But it's working with children and teachers. I really love working with children and teachers, and I especially like working with teachers. As a deputy, I always had people knocking on my door to come in and, can you help me with this, or can we have a conversation about that? And for me, that's one of the best aspects of the job as a leader, that you get to help other people, other teachers, and give them a hand and help them.
Fantastic. That's a great answer. Thank you very much, Vicky.
Thank you.
And so on the other side, what parts of teaching do you consider to be the most challenging?
Now, you said parts there, haven't you, suggesting that there are lots of things. I actually think the thing that is the most challenging in teaching is its relentless nature. Just the fact that there's always something more to do. Mm-hmm. You get to, you can have a to-do list, and I'm sure in every single sector or career, people have to-do lists and feel like they're always doing things. But I just feel like in teaching, you do one job, but as you're doing that, another job is building up on top of it. And sometimes it feels like, because you're almost doing two jobs. You've got the job in the classroom, yeah, and you're teaching the children, and then you've got the job outside of the classroom. You've got the marking, the planning, all of the other things that go with that. And even in an ideal world where teachers' well-being is at the forefront of everything that a school's doing, there are still those two elements to the job, and it feels like it never stops. And I think that's the really most challenging thing about teaching. It's just that you're on the hamster wheel and you're going faster and faster, and there's no opportunity to jump off, is there, until you get to a holiday.
Yeah, and you often get the advice, to try and strike the balance between work and life balance, but try telling that to somebody who's got oodles and oodles of things to do on their to-do list. How is that manageable?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I obviously work with teachers who come to me and say, I'm just overwhelmed, I've got too much to do. Mm-hmm. And it's about prioritising. It's about, I think, because as professionals, we are so committed and dedicated to what we're doing. And I think a lot of teachers are really driven people and perfectionists who want to do everything to the nth degree and as well as they can do. You have to learn that some things are not important.
Yeah.
What's important is being in front of the children and being able to teach them well. And if you're exhausted because you've been up till 1 o'clock in the morning marking the books of those children, who probably aren't even going to have a look, they might give it a cursory glance and think, oh, yeah, and you've been up till midnight, you can't give your best to the children. So one of the things that I work with people on is looking at what's important and what's going to have an impact on the children in front of you. Yeah. And if you're doing something that isn't going to have an impact on the children in front of you, either don't do it or leave it until you can come back to it. Now, that's not always easy, because people are working in schools where senior leadership teams are putting pressure on them. If you're in a high stakes accountability sort of setting where you've got to be putting data in and doing analysis all the time and things like that, I do understand that that's difficult, but there has to be a different mindset towards things, and that understanding that your well-being is the most important thing, and unless you are well, you cannot teach the children well. No. So you have to learn to prioritize. And so when I've said to some teachers sometimes, right, okay, what things can you cross off that list? What can you cross a line through and not do? Honestly, the look on their faces sometimes is like I've told them to, like, I don't know, drink some poison out of a bottle, like Alice in Wonderland, the drink me thing. It's like I've said, they've got to do the most terrible thing in the world, cross something off my list. Can't possibly, but you have to learn to be able to go, right, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And sometimes to prioritize and say, I can do those things this week, but those things can wait. And it's about I think, teaching or supporting teachers to start looking at the things that they've got to do in a different way.
That sounds like a really useful thing to do, not just for yourself as a teacher, but for the children, because if you're all burnt out and you go into teaching, you're not going to be giving the children your best. You're not going to be feeling the best. So that sounds like a really useful exercise, in my opinion.
And as a leader, if you're a leader in a school and you're completely frazzled, you're not giving the staff the best either. I mean, I probably experienced that myself. I virtually got to burnout, and that's why I had to reconsider what I was doing, because I just thought, I can't do this until I'm 60.
Yeah.
It wasn't possible. It would have started to impact on my health at some point. And as a leader, if you're frazzled or you're really tired and you're almost at burnout, you don't have the capacity to lead well. You don't have the capacity when a member of staff comes to you with an emotional issue or with a problem, or they need you to help them. You can't help them. So as a leader, you have to take that responsibility to look after yourself and to say, actually, I'm working too many hours here. There seems to be some, I don't know what it is. It's like some unwritten law in teaching. If you're not working 50 hours a week, you're not doing the job well.
Yeah.
And it's absolute nonsense. And it's one of the things that I really want to get that message across. You can do the job in fewer hours. It is possible, because I've worked with people who've managed to do it. And I think it needs a change of mindset, and it's difficult because it needs a huge shift in culture in teaching and leadership for people to realise you don't have to work 70 hours a week. And if you do, you're not doing the best job that you can do.
No, that's a
because nobody who's working 60 or 70 hours a week is doing their best, the best job that they can, regardless of how much they want to.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to jump to a question further down my list here, because I think it relates better to what you were just talking about. And it's your podcast. So you have a podcast, We Lead Well, and that revolves around promoting well-being within schools, doesn't it? And I was just wondering, can you tell me a little bit more about that project?
Well, I'm really passionate about getting this message across, that there is a different way to do things in teaching, that we can change the way that we work and our working patterns, be more flexible in our approach, not be so focused on high stakes accountability and asking staff to do things that don't make a difference to the education of children. So I created the podcast so that I can get inspirational leaders who are doing things a different way, who do have ideas, who have leaders who've done it and made a difference, so that people can look at them and think, oh, actually, they have done it, and oh, the outcomes are better than they were before. And it's a real shame, because people don't go into education thinking, right, I want to go in there and tell people that they're going to have to work all these hours and fill all this stuff in and do all this admin. They do it because they want to help children. But because of external pressures, Ofsted, league tables, all those external things that put so much pressure on schools, I want people to understand that there are people out there who are not, I'm not saying they're not bothered about those external factors, but they don't let those external factors drive what they do. Exactly. Their passion for children, their passion for teaching and learning, and their passion for supporting teachers is what drives them. And as a result, they get really good outcomes. And when Ofsted go into those schools and those places and talk to those leaders who lead in that really authentic values-led way, they're always impressed with it.
Yeah.
And it's because if you lead from wanting to do the best for, I think it links back to what I was saying before about why it worked so well at Wood Hay, because we dealt with the children who we were teaching. We weren't worried about Ofsted coming in or being judged by anyone. We were doing what we were doing because we knew it was the best thing for the children. And that's why I started the podcast, to get head teachers and senior leaders to understand that if you look after the teachers in your school, and if you look after yourself and you focus on what's going on in your context, in your environment, you will achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve. You don't have to be constantly thinking about those external Ofsted league tables results, because it's about the process and not the outcome, and the process is what's important.
That sounds like some great advice to me. So it's just changing your mindset and being aware that there's other models out there that work, and that maybe that you could look at and see if they can work in your setting as well. That's great. Thank you. So I'm going to ask the next question now. What prompted you to leave teaching and start a coaching company?
Well, it's like I was saying before, I've always really loved working with staff and developing staff. So I've done mentoring of ICT trainees. At the previous school I worked, I was the strategic lead for School Direct. So I set up the programme for initial teacher training along with the teaching school. So I love working with staff and developing staff. And then as a senior leader, obviously responsible for teaching and learning and CPD, the opportunities for working with staff are immense. And I just loved that aspect of teaching. And when I was at one of my other schools that I worked in, this really inspirational guy came in and taught us about coaching. And we spent a while working on coaching in the school and creating coaching, teaching and learning groups. And it just, the power of that always stayed with me. So in my own leadership, I've always used the principles of coaching. I cannot remember the name of the guy for the life of me, because I really wanted to get back in touch with him and say, you developed this passion in me for coaching. So I've always, in my own leadership, really tried focusing on the principles of coaching. And I really enjoyed being a senior leader for a long time. And then my husband and I separated. So I was a single mum trying to be a deputy head teacher, and I found it really, really difficult. I really struggled. It was a difficult time. My son was doing his GCSEs. I said he might just pop in at some point, didn't I? It's just when I was talking about him. He was probably going to ask when I'm making his bacon sandwich. He was doing his GCSEs. My younger son had just started high school, so it was a really stressful time anyway. And I was trying to do the job as a deputy head teacher, and I've been diagnosed in the past, and now the dog's just come in. I've been diagnosed in the past with generalized anxiety disorder. So at particularly stressful times in my life, that can take over, and it can be quite challenging to deal with that. And I think I was almost at the point of burnout. And I knew that I had to change direction and do something different. And I had to sit down and think, what is it that drives me? What's my purpose? Where am I heading? What do I want to do? And I've been a teacher because I do love working with people. I love the element of just being around people, helping people. And I thought back to the coach training that I'd done, and thought, yeah, I'm going to look into this a bit. So I got a coach. I got my own coach, and started to be coached. And it was something that I just found it so amazingly valuable. Yeah. It just really helped me to clarify exactly what I wanted to do. I worked through what my values were and what I valued, and I sort of figured out that I was probably a bit unhappy at work because my values didn't necessarily align with the values of the people I was working with. Sure. So through my own coaching journey, I realised that this was what I wanted to do. So I decided I was going to do a qualification in it. So I did a level 3 coaching diploma at Newcastle College. Had to set up my own coaching business as part of that and coach some clients, which I did, which I just really loved. It was a revelation to think, wow, I could do this as a career.
And
So
sorry to interrupt, Vicky, but one of the questions somebody had asked was there an overlap? So did you start this while you were a deputy head teacher and transition?
I did.
That way you did, yeah.
I did, yeah. So I'm talking about burnout, aren't I? And saying, like, you know, I was so... and then I decided that while I was being a deputy head and going through a divorce, I was going to start my own business. So I'm still doing it now. I do the podcast, I do coaching, I'm doing mental health first aid training. You know, I've got a tendency to take on too much. Sometimes my coach has to say to me, come on, you need to back off here. So yeah, I started to do the coaching in my own time, and then I asked if I could go part-time at work, because I'd been asked by a school in Bradford if I would go and do some work with them, implementing coaching with staff for wellbeing and doing some coaching with pupils. So I went part-time. I went down to 4 days at work, and I was going to the school in Bradford on the other day, and then still doing my own private coaching practice.
Right, okay.
In my own time. So yes, there was an overlap. And then I decided that if I was going to make it work, I needed to devote myself to it full time, especially because I still love going in schools and supporting schools to create coaching communities. And if I was going to do that, I couldn't do that just doing 1 day a week and doing the job as a deputy. So I decided I'd probably decided last year that this was where I was heading, and then I took the plunge and gave my notice in at February half term this year, knowing that I would be a free agent then in September. And then COVID came along, and you know, I wasn't in work, and probably had a little bit more time to start putting a bit more into the business. So I was able to just build it up a little bit more. I was able to I think it just gave me the freedom to take on more private clients. I coach mostly school leaders, female school leaders, middle leaders and senior leaders. So it just gave me a bit more time to take on a few more clients and just start building the business, so that I was ready to jump in, I guess, in September. So that's what I've been doing now for
a fairly
couple of months.
So it's fairly recent now, that transition into your coaching.
Yeah.
And one of the questions one of the members has asked is, what's been the biggest impact in your life as a result of that transition?
Being able to be in charge of my own schedule. I can get up in the morning, take the dog out for a walk or go for a run. You know, if I want to in the week, I can schedule in a bike ride. I'm training actually to do a 70.3 triathlon next summer. In July. So yeah, so it gives me the freedom to decide what I want to do and when I want to do it. I'm busy, don't get me wrong. I'm still sometimes I choose it now rather than it being thrust upon me. But, you know, I still work at 10 o'clock at night sometimes doing bits, but I really enjoy it because it's my business, and I'm working towards being as successful a coach as I can be. So that works for me, and I can schedule my own time. And
I'm sure that flexible aspect of owning your own coaching company will appeal to a lot of teachers who are watching this just now.
I think maybe that's one of the challenges that we were talking about before of being a teacher, is that you don't have ownership of your own time, do you?
No.
And I know in most jobs that's the same, but you can't even make a dentist appointment during the daytime, can you? Or, you know, in some schools you can't go and watch your child's sports day. You can't just book a day off to go and do something like you would be able to in another job. And that's been an absolute revelation for me, just and the reduction in stress, I think, that's come from that, being the master of my own time, not having bells ringing all day and thinking, I've only got 5 more minutes to do this. I mean, sometimes there is that pressure because I'll have a coaching call at 11 o'clock and I get to that point where I'm like, oh, I've got a coaching call in 10 minutes. But it's about me choosing and deciding. And I think that's that's one of the hard things about teaching, isn't it? That you're not in control of your own time.
No, that's true. That's very true. And I know that you've only been coaching since February, but could you actually pin down what are the most common things that teachers would come to you about? And it's mostly
Yeah.
people within management, you said, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been coaching since before February. February was when I handed my notice in at school.
Right,
So
no.
I've been coaching. I had my first client who actually, she put a post on Facebook saying how much her life has changed and how thankful she is to me. She's the very first person I coached, and that's 2 years ago. So I've been doing it for 2 years.
Right, okay.
And obviously, you know, I've been coaching for a long time in schools. Like I said, I did the coach training. That must be 9 years ago when I was at the school in Bolton. So, you know, 9 years I've been practicing coaching.
Right, okay.
And I've forgotten the question that you asked.
Oh, yeah.
Or what the most common things that people come to me.
Exactly.
I think it's the overwhelm, and it's the busyness, and too many things to do, and not enough time. But also, a lot of people come to me, especially women, with confidence issues. They want to be more confident. They want to apply maybe for the next step in their career. Maybe a middle leader wants to be and sometimes one person who I've just coached who said that I've helped her achieve her wildest dreams, which is the most amazing thing anybody's ever said to me. She came because she wasn't sure exactly what she wanted to do with her career in teaching. She was thinking she wanted to be the head of sixth form in the school that she works in, and she worked out that she wants to be an assistant head for teaching and learning. So that's another thing. It's working out exactly what you want to do and what your purpose is. Yeah. I learned that from my coach. I started being coached and realised that coaching was the thing for me. So they're probably, I think, more confidence. The imposter syndrome is a big thing. Sorry, the dog is taking rubbish out of the rubbish bin by the side of me here because I'm not paying her any attention, I think. So confidence and the imposter syndrome, too much to do and not enough time, and then that working out what their purpose is, or career development and helping someone to move to the next stage of their career.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, I found you in the Deputy Head Network on a Facebook group, and there's another member within that group that has this question to ask you, which is probably a question you'd be asked as a coach as well, I'd imagine. Tell me more about the transition from senior leadership team to the Deputy Head role, please.
Well, I did this in a sort of two-stage way, really, because I was a head of English. When I was looking for assistant head jobs, and I was applying all over the place, and I found it really difficult because I didn't have any whole school responsibility, and assistant head roles often ask for you to have had some sort of whole school responsibility. So even though I'd improved the results at Woodhay from 67% to over 90%, that wasn't impressive enough for people to interview me as an assistant head. And I was lucky enough at the time, it was a thing to do that people offered assistant head jobs in English and maths. It was like a bit of a glorified head of department role because they wanted someone with experience who had a proven track record. So I took the step of moving from a head of English up to an assistant head teacher that was called Director of Communications. And at that school, we made a huge difference to the results. They weren't even meeting floor targets when I went there as assistant head, and then ended up getting 72% A star to C. So we made a big difference at that school. And I think then, because I'd been in that role and had the title assistant head teacher, and I'd done a lot of things in that job. I'd done literacy rewards. I was essentially the head of year 7, so I'd gained a lot of pastoral experience. I was then able to apply for an assistant head teacher responsible for teaching and learning role, which is what I went for next. And then after that, once I'd then been a senior leader for 6 years, I felt like I had enough of a broad knowledge to become a deputy head. So if I were giving advice to someone, the first thing I would say is you need to make sure that you find a way of gaining some whole school responsibility. And at the moment, the best way of doing that is probably via NPQSL, because if your head supports you to do NPQSL, you have to do a whole school improvement project as part of that. Okay. So that does give you the ability to say you've taken on a whole school project. But I would also say that you need to broaden your experience. So if you're a curriculum leader, or your job mainly focuses on curriculum, ask if you can shadow someone whose focus is pastoral and do some of the aspects of that job, and have a go at doing some of the aspects of that job, so that you broaden your experience of whole school. Because when you're a deputy head, I was the deputy head. I started off as a deputy head for curriculum. I ended up being deputy head for teaching and learning and progress. But you have to do everything. You know, I had to do safeguarding. I had to deal with pastoral issues every day. I mean, that probably took up most of my time, going out and dealing with pastoral issues on corridors and supporting heads of year. Obviously, I line managed and was attached to a year group. So when you're a deputy head, you have to do a bit of everything. You obviously have your area that you focus on. So the more experience that you've got at the level that you're at, it's easier in a school where a head is supportive of staff taking on voluntary roles or doing a whole school project. But if you can sell what you're doing to the head teacher as something that is going to improve outcomes in some way, I don't think there's a head teacher who would say, okay, don't do that. So you need to really think about, I'm still going to go on about your context, what needs to happen in your school, and then think about something that you can do that will develop your school. And then when you start applying, you've got evidence of outcomes that you've achieved on a whole school, whole school context. So that is really what people are looking for when they appoint a senior leader.
Great, thank you. That was a very thorough answer, and I think that'll be really helpful. So my next question to you, Vicky, is if you could change 2 things within the education sector, what would they be?
First one would definitely be high stakes accountability and league tables. I would do something about that straight away.
Yeah.
I think it just creates target driven cultures, and it's like I was saying before, to me what's important is the process. Why are you doing something, and how are you going to do it? And if you focus on that, and if you focus on engaging the children, supporting your staff, then you will get the outcomes. But a lot of the time, lots of leaders look at it in a back to front way. They go, right, what outcomes do I want? Okay, well, I want to achieve, we want plus 0.7 P8 next year. I mean, for a start, that's just ridiculous, because you don't even know. I think a lot of leaders don't understand Progress 8. You don't even know what you would have to do to get, like, Progress 8 is not future focused. It's not like focused on what you're doing now. It's focused on this year group and what they achieve. So often people are working on arbitrary targets and numbers that actually don't really mean a lot, but seem to. And then when you're working towards something like that, it's really difficult to quantify it, and nobody seems to know, well, what do we need to do to get there? What do we need? Look at your individual kids and think, what do we need to do with these children to help them to learn better, to help them to retain what they're doing, and to help them so that they can do their best in an exam and then be able to leave this school and be successful. That's where everything starts.
So you're talking more like making that connection with the child rather than it being formulaic and saying this is how it's done according to the documentation. It's making that relationship work with the child.
Yeah, and really concentrating on your staff and your children. What are they really good at, and where do they need some help to be even better? And if you work on those areas and you go, people are really good at that, so they could help those people to do that, and everybody works together to support each other, that's a much better way of working than working towards arbitrary targets of, oh, well, let's achieve this or let's try and achieve that. I mean, surely the aim is just for every single person in that school to be the best that they can be.
Yeah.
That's a target. And if you work towards that, then the outcomes will come. It's the process that you use to get there. It's what you put in during that process time. And I think high stakes accountability, and I'd probably change Ofsted as well and make it more supportive rather than at the moment it strikes fear into the heart of leaders and teachers. And actually, really, Ofsted knows so much. They've been in so many schools and they've seen schools where things really work. And I don't really think they go in schools and say, look, this is what the best schools are doing. Here are some ideas.
Yeah.
When Ofsted came to us, it was like, right, tell me about what you're doing, and then they would judge that and say, oh, well, it's either this or it's that. What schools need is for someone to say, well, look, we've looked at all these best schools, and it's like they produce a lot of reports, don't they? And they say, oh, here's a report, read this 80-page document when you're already working 60 hours a week, and here's another document to read, rather than just coming in and saying, we noticed that you're not doing that particularly well, but we've seen a school where they're doing this, and maybe you could try that. So for Ofsted to be more supportive.
Well, that's great. I've got just one last question for you before we finish today. What would be your advice to anyone who's considering a career in education? A broad question.
I would say if you really like children and you really want to help children and you love your subject, then there is no better job than being a teacher. Go for it, but understand that there is a lot of pressure and that you have to look after yourself. And if you do that, it's manageable. But it can be that teaching can be the best job in the world. No day is ever the same, is it? No. I've had so much fun teaching. Like, I've had so many laughs. Children are just, especially when they're growing up into teenagers, they're just the funniest. Funny, they make you laugh so much, and you, like, the relationships that you build with children. I think back to some of the children that I've helped. Maybe that's the most rewarding part of the job, is thinking about some of those children who've been, banging their head on the wall in my office in year 8, and then they leave in year 11 and say to you, thanks so much, I couldn't have done it without you. And there's no feeling like that, is there? If you're passionate about your subject and you love kids, you have to love kids. You have to really like kids to go into education. Then go for it, and you'll absolutely love it. But don't let it take over your life.
So now that's the end of our interview. But is there anything else that you'd like to add that you haven't mentioned already before we leave?
I just think I want teachers and leaders to look after themselves better and not put so much pressure on themselves, to give themselves a break, to understand that it's okay to take time for yourself. It's okay to go and play netball, or go for a round of golf, or go to the pub with your mates on a weeknight. You can do those things and not feel so guilty about it, because it's a long career to be in. If you want to be in teaching, it's a long time till retirement, and you need to enjoy it. And if you're going to enjoy it, you need to look after yourself. And to me, that's the most important thing, to take care of yourself and have a life outside your job, because when you do that, you'll be able to do your job so much better.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I've really enjoyed interviewing you today, genuinely. You've brought some really interesting and important points, And so just thank you once again for taking the time to answer my questions today.
You're welcome. I've really enjoyed it too. It's been really nice to talk to you. I really hope that some people can take something from it and realise that they are really good at what they do, and they just need to give themselves a break sometimes.
That's a fantastic takeaway message. Thank you very much, Vicky.